Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Playeasy Warmup, the podcast where we dive into the stories, people, and places driving the sporting event and tourism industry forward. I'm your host, Kerri Shields. And today I'm joined by Daniel Noake, managing partner at Hammerton Barca. Daniel has spent over 15 years producing and advising major sports, entertainment, and cultural events around the world. From the Trace Music Awards in Kigali and NBA Africa fan zones to UEFA Europa Cup hospitality in Athens and Live Nation concerts across the Middle East. His career has taken him from the BBC to nearly a decade at IMG to consulting for global brands like Google, Universal Music, and Taylor Swift. Big fan. He's pairing his international experience with a commitment to Africa's creative industries, helping position Rwanda and the continent as rising global hubs for live entertainment. This was an incredibly insightful conversation, and I enjoyed it so much. I learned a lot from Daniel, and I hope you do as well. I hope you enjoy. Nothing brings people together like sports, and no place brings people together like the beach. Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. There, you'll find first-class facilities and an experienced planning team that will make sure your sporting or esports event goes off without a hitch. And when the games end, the real play begins. With 60 miles of endless activities and entertainment, it's a guaranteed win for all ages. That's why you can't beat the beach. Start planning at myrtlebeachsports.com. Daniel, welcome to the Playeasy Warmup podcast.
Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, and I thank you so much for taking the time. You are probably the furthest guest we have on, as you are coming in from Africa. So we really appreciate you taking the time in your busy day. So really excited to get into your story and a bit of your background. So thank you.
No worries. The timing's good. It's 7 p.m. here, so the day's over. So this is good timing.
Well, there we go. So it's all fun from here. It's all fun from here.
You go for it, yeah.
Yeah. So just to start us out, can you share a bit about your background and how you first found your way into the world of major events?
Yeah, I started off in television when I graduated, and I did that for a couple of years. And as a teenager, I'd always worked on music festivals locally, so kind of got bitten by the event bug pretty early, but then went into TV, didn't really enjoy it, missed the buzz of events. And so I went back to events. I joined a company called IMG, which is a US company, worked for the London office. I was there for nearly 10 years. And was very lucky enough to work on all manner of different things: sports, entertainment, large scale events, not just in the UK but in India, Middle East. And then in 2017 I moved to the US, and I went freelance as an event producer for a little while, and then taught event management in Washington DC for a good couple of years there. Had a great time in the US, but moved on from the US to Africa, Ethiopia specifically, in 2020, and set up Hammerton Barca, which is a sports and entertainment consultancy which specializes in both producing events, but also working with rights holders and destinations on the consulting side as well, to help facilitate hosting and providing advice around how to produce large-scale events effectively.
Looking at your background, your career began at BBC, which I mentioned to you. I lived in Belfast, so that was really cool to see. Just a name that I haven't heard in a while from living in the UK. And then spending nearly a decade at IMG. What did those early years teach you about building experiences at scale?
I think it taught me the value of intellectual property. And I think over the course of the 10 years, IMG became a little bit more aware themselves about the value of intellectual property, which culminated in, towards the end of my tenure there, they went through a sale process and they were bought by a Hollywood talent agency called WME, which were IP obsessed, although came from a talent agency background. But I think the breadth and the scale of IMG meant that I could work on a bunch of different things. They represented, owned, operated many different sports properties across the world, whether that was football, golf, or tennis. On the entertainment side, we ran large-scale festivals. So it was really the kind of access to those kinds of events and being able to see lots and lots of different formats and types of events happening at a very large scale. And obviously, of course, IMG is chock full of some of the most talented and incredible people in the world with respect to producing major events for sports and entertainment. So it's incredible to be able to learn from really, really experienced people firsthand. So it was just an amazing, amazing introduction to events. So I was very lucky to spend as long as I did there, learning from all those great people.
That's incredible. And then for your journey to take you to the US, I believe you taught at George Washington University, which one of our coworkers, Sarah Capuzzi, was a student there. And so knowing what a great event management program that they have, what insights did teaching give you about event leadership and event management from that collegiate level?
Yeah, having spent at that point, over 10 years actually working in events and then going on to, teach, and you're looking at everything from an academic point of view, and it really did help me to solidify some of the gut feeling that I had about events in terms of production processes or operations or frameworks for management of events, frameworks for risk management of events. So actually, there was a lot of stuff that I'd internalized over the course of my career up to that point, which I was then able to engage with some of the academic literature and research behind a lot of that. And so it was a kind of rounding out of my thinking, but also it's firsthand time with students in a classroom exploring and talking about different scenarios and just gauging where people are at in terms of their interests and what they're thinking about, because events do reflect culture, right? Whether that's sports or entertainment. So you really get an insight from students about what they want to see from live experiences, and I think that taught me a lot in terms from on the execution side as well, because then I was able to apply a lot of that thinking, apply a lot of that learning to things that I was producing as well.
Yeah, I think it's incredible being in university about 10 years ago. This was not even a field that we knew existed before in the early 2013 when I graduated. And so just to see the different kinds of programs that are centralized around events and tourism is just incredible to see. And I'm sure that you feel the same, especially from an international level. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, well, actually, the course that I taught a module, so it was a much broader course than just my module, but that was on the Masters in Tourism Administration program at George Washington University. So, I think to that point, events in the context of George Washington University and the MTA program were very much about generation of tourism. It was all about looking at the effects of hosting major events, whether it be that sports or entertainment. It was looking at best practices within that and the structures that events like that have to sit within in order to be successful. So yeah, I mean that was their focus entirely, and I think to your point about the fact that it's a new field, I mean, you're absolutely right. Even when I was going into I like to think that I'm not very old, but I actually am. But when when I was going into university, that
You are
just
not.
wasn't even just wasn't even an option.
Yeah.
So I think all of these kind of disciplines now that are cropping up, it's not just event management. You can go even more specific, obviously, in the event realm now as well. And there are degrees around sports hosting. There are degrees around sports events in it particularly, and in the UK, specifically around football events, even and management of stadiums. So that is a field that seems to have grown up, not just in terms of what universities offer, but also academically through the research that people do and the kind of research now that's available around whether that's major event management, hosting processes. It's a very, very broad field now, and that seems to have come about really in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, and that's why we are constantly learning, because the whole field it's constantly evolving and innovating. And so I'm always fascinated by where, especially from the education side, is going. And so now you're speaking to us from Africa, but you're originally from London. Could you take us through how you got there and what inspired you to launch Hammerton Barca?
Oh, I think being freelance for a few years in the US was a fantastic experience. I'd spent nearly 10 years in a very big institution, which teaches you to think one way. And so being able to spread my wings a little bit in the US and do lots of different things with different clients. I was very lucky to work with people like Google and Puma on the sports side, Universal Music, and so that sort of helped me broaden my interests a little bit. But um, I've been to Africa both on holiday and maybe a little bit for work, on and off over the course of my career. And it's a fascinating environment. It's a very challenging environment. And so the opportunity came up to move to Ethiopia with my family. And at that time, I felt like it was the right challenge. There are some massive structural challenges within the continent. It is a continent of 54 countries. All of them are culturally very, very different. Ethiopia, no exception there. But I felt that it was open space in terms of how people thought about sports, entertainment, major events. And what I didn't see on the continent was a company that had that international experience, had some of the capabilities that you would associate with international standard event management. And I saw the opportunity to set that up. And I thought, well, at some point, Africa's probably going to be one of the only growth markets left. But also, from working here a little bit on and off during my career, and obviously now with Hammerton Barca, the impact that you can have, whether that's on the training and development side or the consultancy side, outstrips anything that I've ever experienced in the US or Europe, for instance. So I think a lot of it is about reward, and that's quite selfish, obviously. But we're also operating in pretty much white space, because when we work with a client like Live Nation or Blast Esports, for instance, we are virtually the only company that they would trust to be able to execute at the quality level that they demand, working in obviously challenging markets in Africa. And it's very rare to find that those companies have boots on the ground. So, from that perspective, it's nice just to have that freedom and breadth to be able to work with those clients and serve them properly with hopefully a robust set of services that are based around the African continent.
Yeah, that's amazing. And how do you think that you're able to combine your global experience with your vision for the future of events?
I think eh, I think events have always been about innovation. And for me, it's always been about finding new ways to do things, finding better ways to do things. And so I think, given that I've worked across lots and lots of different types of projects with various different clients from all sorts of different industries, even with various different objectives, I think I can bring all of that to bear on what the future looks like for sports events in Africa, but also the wider region as well. I mean, we don't limit ourselves to Africa. We've done stuff in the Middle East, for instance, still work in Europe a little bit. So I think we learn a lot from the continent as well about the way people do things and the way people think and the kind of systems and processes that operate here, particularly around payment systems, right? I mean, Africa is just a fantastic fintech environment, because what works in the US and what works in Europe just doesn't work in Africa, and have a very different way of approaching everything. And that gives you a kind of another string, if you like. When you go back to Europe, you go to the Middle East, and you come out of Africa again, you're able to apply some of that, a different type of thinking. So, hopefully, though, it's all about innovation. It's all about trying to find ways to do things better.
Yeah, and it's clear to see why these groups would need to any sort of consultancy, especially with you being in Africa and the experience that you've had in Europe. So, could you just give your quick pitch, or as long of a pitch as you want, for what you do at Hammerton Barca?
We primarily do two things. We manage projects on behalf of clients, and for the most part, those clients are rights holders that are based outside of the African continent, and they want to do something on the continent, and they need a reliable partner to be able to execute on their behalf. So, from that perspective, we are a producer. The second thing that we do is consulting. And so, again, we work with rights holders, governments or destinations, even suppliers, primarily on the African continent, to help them understand the sports or entertainment hosting landscape, help provide training and capacity building. and generally support the industry as far as we possibly can with the expertise that we have in house.
Amazing. Could you give two real life examples? I know you mentioned Live Nation. Maybe you could use them as a customer, but for those two sides of how you help.
Yeah, so I mean, Live Nation is a really good example. Live Nation, a couple of years ago, started running concerts and major events in Cairo, in Egypt, and we stepped in as a project manager for those events. There's a huge supply chain, obviously, around events like concerts and festivals, especially at the scale at which Live Nation do them. So we're there to help interpret what's happening on the ground, the systems and procedures that a company like that, and it's not just a Live Nation, it's virtually any publicly listed company that wants to operate anyway. There is a set, as you know, there's a set of systems and procedures that you have to follow, and that doesn't always translate very well to parts of Africa, right? So there's a
Yeah.
kind of process of interpreting that for the local environment, putting it into cultural context, and helping them navigate the market a little bit as well, whether that's from a cultural perspective, whether that's from a fiscal perspective, because there are unfortunately markets here where it's virtually impossible to take money out of the market. If you're selling tickets in the local market, then that revenue can be very difficult to extract. And that's a kind of producing combined with a consultancy role, really, because people come in with good intentions, of course, and they want to get a concert done, or they want to get a sport event done, we work a lot with World Freestyle Football, for instance, which is a much smaller scale thing. But again, it's sort of half about producing and that's a very defined role, of course, and you go about that in pretty much the same way everywhere. But then it's also the kind of advisory aspect to that, to say, well, yeah, we understand the local market here. We understand what's going to play well culturally or not. And so we sort of combine those two things a lot. I guess another example at a very different type of project would be something like I'll work with the government of Mauritius, with the Economic Development Board, where they're looking at how they generate more tourism through sports and looking at trends, particularly in adventure sports tourism. So we get involved with those guys to say, look, these are the key trends. Here is what people are thinking in Europe. Here's what people are thinking in the US. Here are the sports that we're seeing growth in, and here are the assets that you have or could develop easily. And so from there, you start to build a strategy around how they might meet that objective to drawing more tourism. That's a very different type of consultancy project, but a lot of the time we're sort of combining both.
Yeah, and that's what it seems like many of your projects bring together the sports, the entertainment, and the culture, and I think it's incredibly interesting. And so why do you think that those intersections resonate strongly with the organizations that you're working with?
I think it's the trend now, to be honest. I mean, when you look at what Live Golf are doing, when you look at properties like Baller League, for instance, or Kings League in Spain, where and okay, it's an older property, but the IPL, in terms of what that did for cricket, it is a combination of sports and entertainment and culture. These things don't exist in their own silos anymore. When I was at IMG, obviously we had the UFC and professional bull riding properties, which were owned properties there, and that was very much about combining the entertainment with the sport. Obviously, there is proper competition there. There is a proper rule book. It's governed by a federation, in the same way like a Formula One is. But there's also a concert after every Formula One event now. So I think that is the trend, and I think it's been that way for some time. And I think people have stopped looking at sports in terms of a silo. And realize that there's actually more growth there available if they can mix in entertainment, mix in cultural elements, and also tailor that to local markets too.
Yeah, and you see it for every event, major event I've been to, even some of the youth events, just how people are being creative in terms of how can you match, a welcome party concert to the Final Four, or how do we get a convention site in order for everyone to experience things outside of the game? And so it's just fascinating to see how much it's developed over the course of once not to age ourselves, but since was playing this sport, every event you go to, it's just the entertainment, cultural, and sports experiences combined. And so, how would an organization? You work I mean, you're naming places all across the world, and but some that people in the US might know. How do organizations find you to work with you and receive your services?
Yeah, it's a good question. We don't actually do a huge amount of marketing, which is on us. We tend to get referred a lot
Okay.
by either existing or past clients. And we do have a website. We do have all the normal social media. We're not very good at pushing it. But yeah, I mean, primarily we're working through referrals a lot of the time. And there is some organic stuff that comes in through the website because ultimately, if you're, and this is true of Baller League, who is a current client. So the German 6v6 football tournament started a couple of years ago. It's grown exponentially in Europe. They launched in the UK last year. But they effectively Googled event management firms in Africa and found our website. So sometimes you
Oh,
get lucky with stuff like that. But there isn't actually that much, when you're looking for a certain set of capabilities, and this goes back to what we were saying earlier, if you're looking for a certain set of capabilities and experiences, then we're going to be right up there in terms of what we're able to deliver and the experience that we would bring to something if you need to do something on the continent, on the African continent.
awesome. And how how did you originally connect with Playeasy? I know we have people listening who are like, "How the heck did you get in touch with Dan and his organization?" So, what originally drew you to Playeasy, and how do you see it being beneficial to the work that you do?
Well, we've worked with governments, as I say, and so a lot of governments that we speak to are interested in hosting and how they go about connecting with federations, for instance. And so, one example, we've taken the government of Rwanda to the Hosts and Federations Summit in Lausanne in Switzerland and supported them through the process of making connections with some of those federations, amazing federations that are in Switzerland. And that's resulted in relationships where they're starting to bring in major events now. One example of that is the UCI World Road Cycling, which is happening here in September. That's the first time that event has ever happened on the continent. And so there's a lot of governments that are really looking at how they best connect with federations and how they market themselves as a destination, particularly to sports events. And so our experience of that is a very manual process, right? It's who you know, it's kind of old boys network to a certain degree. And what I really liked about Playeasy was that it was a platform that leveled the playing field a little bit. And there was an opportunity to connect with a vast number of destinations. And for some of our federation partners that we might work with, being able to put an event on Playeasy, very concisely talk about what it is, what the opportunity is there, and then market that event to dozens and if not hundreds of destinations now, I think, on Playeasy, right? It's absolute no brainer. So that's where we first got connected and first got talking about who we work with, what their objectives were and how Playeasy might support it. We've we've worked with World Freestyle Football to post events on Playeasy and connect with destinations through Playeasy. We did that similarly with the International Schools Federation with a few of the events that they have. And we got some fantastic leads. We had some fantastic conversations with destinations. So I saw Playeasy as a way to democratize the
Yeah.
process, put a bit of structure behind it, and get rid of the old boys network, which I'm generally not a fan of, but which is a bit rich for someone coming from IMG and anybody knows about that business and how it operates. But there we go.
Uh-huh. Well, no, I mean, it's so nice to hear because that's exactly why we built Playeasy. And even from my experience playing internationally, I can see from just the growth of the international sporting events coming into the US, just from living in Belfast, there's a whole group of basketball players that come every year to bring over the Irish players and compete in America. And I think it always warms my heart that something so close to my heart is, being connected through the platform. And so, when you are looking for, I mean, you've worked with a bunch of cities and on the event organizer side, when you're advising these cities on hosting strategies, what are some key ingredients that you think make a destination stand out?
Well, I mean, we do it mostly in Africa. So what we're trying to do with destinations is identify either natural assets or infrastructure assets that are there that are usable. We the budgets are not what they are in the US or Europe, obviously, or even Asia, right, for sports hosting. So fundamentally, you have to have great natural assets. You have to have here security is a big issue, of course, in lots of countries. So you have to be secure enough to know that you're going to drive tourism if you host an event, and people are going to look positively on the opportunity to come to the country and visit the country. But also, I think it's about identifying where the skills gaps are in the industry, because obviously sports hosting, it depends on what your objectives are, and everybody's objectives are different. Um, for some people, it is a pure economic calculation. But for lots of countries that we work with, and by the way, we're not talking about the Olympics and we're not talking about the soccer World Cup or anything. We're talking about reasonably small things in a lot of cases. But what we can help identify is where the skills gaps are in the local market, in the local supply chain, where there is a opportunity to capacity build, and then we can start to match some of that up with particular events, because we think that there's an opportunity there to bring in equipment that will be, if you're hosting something for 3 years, for instance, or 5 years, then you bring in a set of equipment, you know that equipment's going to work, you know that there's a local operator that needs it. There are lots of young people. I mean, Africa is an incredibly young continent, and there's lots of young people coming into the events industry, and training and development is hard to come by here. So is there an opportunity to train and develop young people, increase their skills, give them exposure to an international event property, and that helps grow capacity in the local market, which then, of course, leads to being able to host bigger and better things. And if it is an economic calculation eventually, then that all feeds into it. So, yeah, I mean, for us, it's if you've got great natural assets and you've got a great country brand, that obviously puts you in great stead straight away. But obviously, you want to be matching that with infrastructure on the ground as well. I mean, we don't want to be it sounds obvious, right? But you don't want to be hosting a skiing event in Rwanda. You want to be hosting stuff that goes into the arena here, into the stadium. So there's all of that piece of it as well to make sure the hosting process is efficient.
Yes, well, 100%. And you mentioned the economic impact assessments that you also provide as a service. Why do you think it's so important for destinations to understand the data behind the events when competing for opportunities?
I think it helps because it gives you a mindset that you can tweak certain things and achieve certain objectives and make that measurable. I think a lot of people approach us and say, we don't think it's even possible to put an economic impact calculation behind this small thing or something, which it generally is possible. And we've worked with a number of stakeholders, whether government ministries or even private stakeholders, to prove that you can put a calculation behind it. And I think often in Africa, where the perceptions are that, and it's for sometimes good reasons, that it's a very poor society, there may not be a need to host events. You should focus on education, or you should focus on X, Y, and Z before you even look at hosting a UCI World Road Cycling Championship as we have in Rwanda. But I think the numbers and the economic impact calculations help prove that there is a reason to do it. It does provide tangible value to the country as well as to the federation that's coming in, or to the event that's coming in. And being able to talk about that impact confidently with data helps make the argument against some people that are reasonably pessimistic about what it means to a country. So often that is just an economic argument, though, right? It's about, if we host X and it costs us Y, then we get this many people in, they stay this long in the market, they spend this much. All of those factors go into it. But there are so many other factors that we've just discussed. It's about national pride, it's about country marketing, it's about training and development, capacity building. So you often focus on the economic impact calculation because you can do it. It does provide you hard data, but then there's lots of other reasons to look at it as well. And those are, again, assessments that we provide. Not to labor the point, it's just that we tend to get approached and say, if we host this, is it going to make us any money? Is it going to come out? Are we going to end up in a positive? So that's why we kind of focus on that bit first, because that's what we're asked to do.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And that's something we just hosted our first conference this summer, and our theme of the conference was proving your worth beyond a reasonable doubt as a destination. And a lot of that comes and starts with the data. And so being able to prove that by bringing X event into the city, it created X amount of economic impact that was originally worth that investment. And so I think it's great to hear. It's a common theme no matter what country you're in, especially as the trend of tourism, sports tourism especially, is just going to continue to rise. The importance of data to back it up, I think, is hugely important.
I would just add on to that that the biggest piece of data that you can access around sports tourism is the growth projection, which I mean, I think
Yep.
sports tourism globally is probably getting on for about $700 million in annually, and that's projected to rise to 2 trillion annually in the next 10 years. So if you look at it on that basis, then you know everything else is following that figure, I think.
Yes, 100%. And that is something you recently just published a research on attracting global touring concerts. And this is something that Playeasy, we're getting into more than just sports. We're getting into the overall events. So I would love to hear what your biggest findings were from that work and research.
Yeah, we looked at something really specific, which is how Rwanda could attract major global touring concerts to the country. And so we're talking about, the top global touring acts like Ed Sheeran, Beyonce, for instance. That requires major infrastructure, major planning. If you're a Taylor Swift, then obviously the economic impact is huge. It's been well publicized recently. So we interviewed firstly stakeholders within Rwanda. We interviewed local suppliers and people within the local supply chain to understand how they thought about events of that scale and how they thought about their capacity to deal with events of that scale. And we're also very lucky to, because we work with a lot of them, interview some of the major global promoters from companies like Live Nation, AEG Presents, for instance, to talk about when they go into a country, what are the factors that they are looking at and what are the kind of metrics that they're focusing on when they decide to effectively make what we discovered was a short-term foreign direct investment. It's a project-based FDI, which there's lots of research around foreign direct investment and attracting foreign direct investment into particularly African nations and African markets, but less of this around kind of project-based investment, which is effectively what a global touring concert is. So the key findings there were that ultimately you have to put in a raft of different things to be able to competently attract promoters. But I think one of the headline things was it's wrong to assume that a company like a Live Nation or an AG Presents or an IMG, for instance, were looking at things on a purely financial basis. And I think what we found was that there were areas where they had decided to enter a market and they decided to make a loss, not a massive loss, but make a loss, a sustained loss for a number of years because they really believed in the long-term growth of that market and they really believed in the fact that they could develop the capacity, human resource, competency within that nation to a point where it could be an amazing global touring market. And if you're one of those big promoters, then you tend to work on volume. And if you're a Live Nation, then you might be booking 15 shows, massive tour, right? And some of those dates are going to do really well, some of them are not going to do so well. And you're happy to swallow to a certain extent the ones that don't do so well, particularly if you're kind of pushing them into a market which you really believe in the long term. So I think that was one of the headline things for us, that it was possible for a country like Rwanda to attract these sorts of events at this scale. It's no one simple thing, unfortunately, but I think the assumption that all the promoters were in it just to make good money out of a show like that was probably incorrect.
It's so interesting. And if for anyone who would like to access that report, how would they be able to do so?
Well, it's going to be published, fingers crossed, very soon. It's been
Oh,
accepted to a journal. We're about to make it public on our website, parts of that or extracts of that
oh,
research.
awesome.
We can't do too much until it's published in the journal, but hopefully that will happen, and then it will be publicly accessible online as a piece of academic research. And then following that publication, we'll release it onto the website as well.
Oh, I'm excited to check it out. I mean, every conference that I've been to the last 2 years has talked about the Taylor Swift effect, and as a Swiftie, it was always it's always a session that I would like to sit in on because it is incredibly, I mean, interesting into how much impact that a concert like that could have had on so many cities across the world. So I'm excited to read that. And so from to finish this out, so from your perspective, how is the global live events industry evolving and what trends should destinations be paying close attention to?
I think what we're seeing is things like Baller League come along, for instance, a really good example of, and again, Live Golf, for instance, where you've got formats that are mixing up the rules and appealing to a younger audience who are accessing content in a very different way to how I would have done at the same age, right? So streaming platforms, OTT platforms are now starting to rule in terms of sports hosting rights, particularly. So I think that's something to pay attention to in the sense that it doesn't necessarily need to be a global property. We say this a lot to people that we work with. I think there are opportunities to do, if your objective is to do country marketing, and appeal to a certain demographic, then you may not need to host anything particularly logistically complex, but it may have enormous global reach in the sense of a baller league, for instance. I think the other kind of big thing that we're seeing that I think again we advise people to pay attention to is, and I think you've spoken on it previously on one of your episodes. It's the AI impact and how that is impacting management of events. And from our perspective, that's really democratizing the industry in terms of access to expertise, access to real time advice, access to best practice. That is not now locked up in a company or an agency or a particular person somewhere. It's available to everyone. And that's extraordinarily powerful. And so I think the whole process of not only the hosting process and the bidding process, right, but then the organizing process. I think that's becoming a lot more efficient through the clever use of AI tools, and I can only see that growing. And I think that's going to drive this 2 trillion valuation in the next 10 years for sports tourism for sure, because there'll just be a lot more of it. It will just become easier. So I don't think AI is a buzzword, of course. I hate kind of jumping on the bandwagon, but can't ignore that it's going to have an impact and is already having an impact in terms of how easy it is to get stuff done.
Yeah, I joked recently at a conference that 5 years ago we didn't even know what AI was, and now just to see how much it's transformed our everyday lives, specifically for us in the event space, is just something to look out for. And so, looking ahead, where do you see Hammerton Barca in 5 years from now, and what's your dream vision of the impact that you'd like to make?
I think our objective has always been to be an IP owner. That's the background that I came from, to bring it full circle, I guess. We don't want to be a service provider for any more than we have to be. We would like to get our skin in the game at some stage and develop IP and own that IP and grow it, and make sure that we're training an industry and growing an industry along with it. So, in 5 years' time, if you ask me what success looked like, it would be a sports and entertainment IP that we own and produce in house, and we're bringing in young people into the organization, training them in the way that we think they would need to operate, and making that successful. So I'm very hopeful. We're focused on the day to day at the moment, but that is definitely the long term objective.
Well, I'm excited to continue to follow. And so, just to end us out, so a few personal questions. You've been a part of a ton of events in sports and entertainment. What is one that has really stood out for you?
I think the one that really stands out for me is probably the one where I realized how powerful sport could be. It was 2013. I was in India, Bangalore. I was running the Chinnaswamy Stadium in Bangalore. It was an IPL cricket game between Bangalore and Chennai. And I used to have my desk on the field of play. I used to bring the desk out onto the field and put the laptops on it and do all of the kind of tournament paperwork and stuff. And I got a text from my then girlfriend who was in Ghana. And she said, "I've just switched on the TV and I can see you." Uh, and the audience, it sort of dawned on me how big the audience for IPL was at that time. It's grown a bit now, but it was still 1 billion people watching some of those games. So it just sort of dawned on me the power of sport and the universality of some sports as well, particularly cricket. But
Yeah.
you see that a lot with football, of course. It's not the only sport that has a truly global audience. So that always really sticks in my head. That one is like, I can see you.
That is- that's that's amazing. It sounds like a very cool event. But so, what has been the biggest lesson you've learned through your journey?
The biggest lesson is that you've got to look after people. You've got to look after yourself. I come from obviously an events background, and the hours are hard. The gigs are hard. Sometimes people aren't particularly nice to each other. And I think getting older and becoming more comfortable in, your skills, having a bit of experience behind you, and becoming more and more a manager of other people gives you a sense of responsibility, particularly if you've been through some pretty rough situations in the past. I think the one learning I have is that you've got to look after people. You've got to hire good people, train good people, look after them really well, because ultimately we don't have an industry without great people in it. No, I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much equipment you buy. Doesn't matter how much celebrity you have. You've got to have great people to put that stuff on. Almost nothing else matters. And I think that's true for a lot of industries, in fairness.
Oh, I love that, and something that we really try to pride ourselves on. If we could be the best tech in the world, but if we don't have good people around, it doesn't mean nearly as much. So that's such a great note to end on. And I wish we had more time. We'll have to have you back on because there's so much content that we could talk about just from your background and your experience. But I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time, Daniel.
Thanks so much. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing at Playeasy. It's awesome.
Thank you. Until next time, everyone. See you later. Bye.